If my wife left tomorrow, life would go on. The Mafia boss, he spoke calmly, but she heard everything. The phone rang at 11 at night, and Dante Orsini picked it up before the second ring. He did not move from his chair. He did not lean forward. He did not change the way he was breathing. He simply picked it up, pressed it to his ear, and said one word. Yes. Mara was standing in the kitchen doorway. She had come down for a glass of water. She was wearing his old gray shirt, the one with the loose button at the collar, and her hair was pulled back in the kind of way that only happens when a person is not thinking about their hair. She had stopped walking the moment she heard his voice. Not because the word was alarming. One word is never alarming. She stopped because of what was underneath it. She had been married to this man for 13 years. She knew every version of his voice. She knew the voice he used at dinner parties, low and charming, the kind that made everyone at the table feel chosen. She knew the voice he used with his mother, softer, slower, a version of himself that only came out when he thought no one else was listening. She knew the voice he used in arguments, which was, in its own way, the most frightening one, because it never rose, it never cracked. It simply became more precise, more careful, like a person trimming a wire. This was none of those voices. This was the voice underneath all of them. She stood very still, and she did not get her glass of water. Dante was sitting in the leather armchair near the window, the one he called his reading chair even though she had never once seen him read in it. The lamp beside him was on. The rest of the room was dark. He was looking at the middle distance, at nothing in particular, and his free hand rested on his knee with the kind of stillness that does not come naturally to people. That kind of stillness has to be built. It has to be practiced, over years, until it becomes the first thing rather than the last. She could not hear what the person on the other end was saying. She caught pieces, numbers, a name she did not recognize, a date. Then Dante said, "Handle it quietly." 3 words. She went back upstairs. She did not get her water. She lay down beside him 20 minutes later when he came to bed, and she kept her eyes closed and her breathing even, and she listened to him settle into sleep with the ease of a man who has no unfinished business keeping him awake. She stared at the ceiling for a long time. In the morning, he made her coffee the way he always did, 2 sugars, a small pour of cream, set on the counter beside her without ceremony. The way people do things they have done so many times the gesture has become unconscious. He kissed her on the top of her head. He picked up his jacket. He left. Mara sat with her coffee and looked at the chair by the window. She thought about the word quietly. She had married Dante when she was 29 years old. She had known, in the way that adults know things they choose not to examine too closely, that he was a man with a complicated life. He moved through the world in a way that did not invite questions. People opened doors for him. Tables appeared at restaurants that were fully booked. Men she had never met shook her hand at parties and said it was a pleasure, as though they had been waiting to say it. She had understood, somewhere beneath the part of her that was choosing a wedding dress and arguing pleasantly about flowers, that her husband existed in a world that had its own rules. She had told herself that was not her world. For 13 years, that had been enough. She grew up in a small house in the kind of town where everyone knew your name, and most of them knew your business too. And there was a comfort in that even when it was suffocating. Her father worked at the post office. Her mother taught piano lessons on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. It was a life of ordinary sounds. Screen doors, piano scales, the particular creak of a specific floorboard outside her bedroom. She had grown up understanding that the world made sense, that things were what they appeared to be, and that people, mostly, were too. Dante had appeared to be a great many things, and for a long time she had let appearance be enough. She was good at this house. She had made it into something real. She had chosen the paint colors herself, warm whites and a deep blue in the study that Dante had looked at and said, simply, good. She had filled it with things that mattered to her, books she actually read, photographs she had taken herself on an old film camera she found at a market, a lamp in the corner of the living room that gave the kind of light that makes everything look like late afternoon. She had built a life inside this house, and the life felt genuine. She had never thought of it as a performance. Standing in the kitchen doorway at 11 at night, she had begun to wonder. Not about who Dante was. She had always had a sense of that, kept at a careful distance, the way you sense heat without touching the source. She had begun to wonder about herself, about the woman who had lived in this house for 13 years and had chosen, deliberately, to stay on one side of a line she had never let herself name. The line had a name now. She finished her coffee. She washed the cup. She set it back in the cabinet with the handle turned the right way, the way she always did, and she stood at the kitchen sink and looked out at the garden, which was just beginning to go gold at the edges because October had arrived the way October always does, without asking. The thing about Dante was that he was not a cruel man. That is what made everything so complicated. He was generous in the specific way that powerful people are generous, without hesitation, and without the need for acknowledgement. He remembered things. He noticed things. When her mother had been unwell the previous winter, he had arranged, without being asked and without telling her he had done it, for a driver to take her mother to every appointment. She had found out about it 3 weeks later from her mother, who had mentioned it in passing and assumed Mara already knew. He was also, she understood now, a man who said, "Handle it quietly," at 11 at night, and then came to bed and slept without interruption. She did not know how to hold both of those things at once. She was going to have to learn. Their son, Oliver, was 8 years old and deeply interested in birds. He had a field guide that he carried everywhere, dog-eared and annotated in his careful looping handwriting. And on weekends he and Mara would walk in the park near the house, and he would point at things and tell her their names, with the solemn satisfaction of a person sharing important information. He was a quiet child, thoughtful. He had Dante's eyes and her father's way of tilting his head when something interested him. She thought about Oliver constantly in the days that followed the phone call. She thought about what she was teaching him, without words, simply by the way she lived. Children do not learn from what parents say. They learn from what parents accept. She was not sure, yet, what she accepted. She was not sure, yet, where her line was. But she had felt it, for the first time, the night before, standing in the kitchen doorway in Dante's old gray shirt, not getting her glass of water. The line was somewhere. She could feel its edge. She just did not know yet which side of it she was standing on. Dante came home that evening with flowers, not roses. He knew she did not care for roses. Dahlias, orange and rust-colored, the kind that looked like something a painter would choose. He set them on the counter and said nothing about them. He asked about her day. He listened in the attentive way that he had, head slightly tilted, full attention on her face, and she talked about the book she was reading, and the call she had received from her friend Claire, and the grocery list she had been building all week, and he laughed, once, softly, at something she said about the price of good olive oil. She watched his face the whole time. She was learning to watch differently now. He was the same man he had always been. That was the thing. He had not changed. Nothing in him was different. She was the one who was different. She had heard something she was not supposed to hear, and the hearing of it had not introduced a new Dante into her life. It had simply shown her, with perfect clarity, the one who had always been there, waiting, as it turned out, for her to pay attention. She put the dahlias in a blue glass vase, the tall, narrow one she kept on the windowsill, and she set them where the afternoon light could find them, and they were very beautiful, and she stood looking at them for a long moment before she went to start dinner. Her hands were perfectly steady. That was the part that stayed with her afterward, not what she had heard, not even what it meant. The part that stayed was how steady her hands were. She did not know, standing at the kitchen counter with her hands not shaking, whether that was strength or whether it was something else entirely. The stillness that lives on the other side of shock, once the shock has finished. She started dinner. The kitchen smelled like garlic and olive oil, and the dahlias from across the room, and outside the October light was going, and the garden was gold and ordinary and still. Everything looked exactly like it always had. Nothing was. Mara did not become a different person overnight. That is not how it works. People tell themselves that revelation is like a switch, that you hear a thing, or see a thing, and something in you flips, and from that moment forward you are changed. It is a comfortable story, because it makes transformation feel like a single moment you can point to. But the truth is slower and less clean than that. What changed was her attention. She had always been observant. She noticed things, The way people held their shoulders when they were uncomfortable. The way conversations shifted when someone in the room had power over someone else. The particular sound a silence makes when it is being chosen, rather than occurring naturally. She had spent her whole marriage noticing things and filing them in a part of herself that she had never labeled, a place for things she saw but did not examine. She began to examine them now. It started small. She began to pay attention to the phone calls. Not by hovering or listening at doors. Nothing so obvious. She simply stopped leaving the room when they happened. She stayed where she was, and let her awareness widen, the way you widen the aperture on a camera to let in more light without shifting the frame. She looked like a woman reading, or folding laundry, or slicing vegetables. She was doing all of those things. She was also listening. Dante was careful. She had always known this abstractly, the way you know things about a person because it is part of their established character. But watching it in practice was different. He was careful in a way that was almost architectural. Every word placed deliberately, every silence precisely long enough. He never said more than was needed, and he never said the thing itself when a related thing would do. It reminded her, strangely, of poetry. The meaning lives in what is not written. She started keeping a small notebook, a brown one with an elastic band, the kind she used for grocery lists and small thoughts, so that if Dante ever saw it, it would read as nothing. She did not write names in it. She did not write dates. She wrote impressions, shorthand, things that only she would understand in context. She was not sure what she intended to do with any of this. She told herself she was not investigating. That word had a heaviness to it that she was not ready to carry. She was simply, she told herself, paying attention for the first time. She was becoming a more honest resident of her own life. There was a man who came to the house on irregular Thursdays. His name was Leonard, and he was somewhere in his 50s, with the kind of tan that comes from working outdoors, and not from holidays. And he always arrived with something in his hands, a folder of papers, a bag of something from a particular bakery, once a small box with a latch that Dante took from him in the hallway, and did not bring further into the house. Leonard never came past the front room. He never accepted a drink or a seat. He and Dante spoke near the door in voices low enough to be respectful of the house without being low enough to suggest they had anything to hide. That was the craft of it. She was beginning to understand. Nothing was hidden. It was all simply arranged so that the space for questions never quite appeared. She brought Leonard a coffee one Thursday, because it was cold outside and she had been raised in the kind of household where you offered people things, and she watched his hands when she handed him the cup. His hands were steady and large, and had the kind of work in them that had nothing to do with paperwork. He thanked her, and his eyes were pleasant and flat in the way of a person who has trained pleasantness into the surface of himself. Dante had watched her give Leonard the coffee, and said nothing. Afterward, when Leonard had gone, he said, "You didn't have to do that." He looked cold, she said. Dante looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Good." The same word he had used about the blue paint in the study. She understood, only later, that this was how he responded to things he approved of, a single flat word of acknowledgement, and then the subject was closed. She had received many of these across 13 years. She had always read them as intimacy, the shorthand of two people who know each other well enough that language can be compressed. She still believed they were intimacy, but she understood now that intimacy and transparency are not the same thing, and had perhaps never, in this marriage, been the same thing. Oliver came home from school that week with a drawing he had done in class. It was a picture of their family, the four of them, herself, Dante, Oliver, and their dog, an old basset hound named George who slept almost constantly and snored at a volume that was genuinely impressive. In the drawing, Dante was the tallest figure by some margin. Oliver had given him a blue jacket because that was his favorite of Dante's jackets, the cashmere one he wore on weekends. In the drawing, Dante was smiling. His stick figure hands were open, palms upward, in the universal posture of a person with nothing to hide. Mara put it on the fridge with a magnet. She stood looking at it after Oliver had gone back to his homework. 8-year-old Oliver had drawn his father with open hands. She thought about that. She thought about what a child sees when he looks at a parent. The narrowness of that vision, not because the child is foolish, but because he is seeing the portion of the person that is given to him, the portion that is shaped specifically for his receiving. Dante was a good father. She had never doubted this, and she did not doubt it now. He was patient with Oliver in a way that she found moving, genuinely moving, the way he could sit for an hour and listen to a child talk about birds with the full-bodied attention most adults reserve for things that directly concern them. Whatever Dante was, he was also that. She was learning to hold both. It was hard work. It was the kind of work that does not have a name, because people do not like to acknowledge that they do it constantly. The work of keeping two incompatible truths in the same room, without letting them destroy each other. Claire came for lunch on a Wednesday. Claire was her oldest friend, from the town she had grown up in, and she was the kind of person whose company felt like taking off a coat you have been wearing too long. They had been friends since they were 11, and they had the kind of friendship that can survive long silences and resume without effort. Claire had never entirely trusted Dante, not because she had any specific reason not to, but because she was perceptive and protective, and those two things together produce a particular kind of wariness. She had never said this directly. Neither had Mara, but it lived between them, named only in the careful way Claire always asked. And how are things? Really? With the weight on the last word. On this particular Wednesday, Mara said, "Things are fine." Claire looked at her over the rim of her glass and said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "You look tired. I haven't been sleeping well." "Is everything okay?" Mara looked at her. She looked at the face she had known since she was 11 years old, the face that had been at her wedding, the face that had held her when she cried about things she no longer remembered, the face that had never once judged her and would not start now. She said, "I think I've been living inside a story I didn't write." Claire did not ask what she meant. That was the gift of a long friendship. Claire said, "What story do you want to be in?" Mara thought about it for a long moment. "A true one," she said. She did not say anything else. Claire did not push. They finished their lunch and talked about Claire's garden and Oliver's bird book and the particular sadness of good cheese being too expensive, and they hugged at the door, and Mara stood on the step and watched her drive away. Then she went back inside. George the basset hound was asleep in his bed in the corner of the kitchen, producing the low rumbling snore that had been the background music of their household for 7 years. Mara sat down on the floor beside him, which was not something she normally did, and she put her hand on his side and felt him breathe, that simple, reliable rhythm. She sat there for a while. She was not crying. She was not afraid, exactly. She was doing the thing she had been doing for weeks now, the thing she did not have a word for. She was measuring. She was standing on the edge of something and looking down and taking very careful account of the distance. She was also, for the first time, beginning to think about what came after the measuring. The notebook was in the kitchen drawer, beneath the takeaway menus and the spare batteries. She took it out, and she wrote one line, in the smallest handwriting she owned. She wrote, "What do you do when the man you love is exactly who he always was?" She closed the notebook. She put it back under the menus. George snored on, unmoved and magnificent, entirely at peace with the world as it was. She wished, briefly, that she was a dog. Then she went to start dinner. The kitchen smelled like garlic again. It always smelled like garlic because she cooked with it every night, and the walls had absorbed years of it by now, and she thought that if she ever left this house, the garlic smell would be the thing she missed in the most unexpected moments. Not Dante's voice, not the dahlias on the windowsill, the garlic in the walls. There was something in that. She did not know what. She kept cooking. Outside, the evening was coming in fast, the way it does in late October, earlier each night. As though the dark is practicing, she turned on the lamp above the stove, and the kitchen went warm and golden and ordinary, and she stood in it and cooked, and she was very aware, in a way she had not been in years, that she was choosing to stand here. She was choosing this kitchen, this light, this smell. She was choosing it consciously, for the first time, instead of simply inhabiting it. And because she was choosing it, she understood, she could also choose not to. That was the thing that had changed. Not Dante. Not the house. Not the life that looked so correct from the outside. The thing that had changed was that Mara had become, quietly, without ceremony, a woman who understood she had a choice. Dante came home at 7. He hung his jacket on the hook by the door. He came into the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. He stood beside her at the counter and looked at what she was making and said, "Smells good." "It'll be ready in 20 minutes, she said. He nodded. He took his water. He went to find Oliver. She listened to them in the other room, Dante's voice low and patient, Oliver's voice running at the particular speed it reached when he was excited about something, and the dog, presumably, somewhere beneath all of it. She stirred the pot. She did not shake. She was paying attention. She was learning to carry the weight of what she knew, without letting it show on her face, and she was discovering, to her own surprise, that she was very good at it. She wondered when she had learned that. She wondered how long she had been doing it without knowing. She kept stirring. 20 minutes later, they sat down to dinner, the three of them, and Oliver talked about a heron he had seen near the park, and Dante asked the right questions at the right moments, and Mara ate her food, and smiled when she was supposed to smile, and laughed when she was supposed to laugh. And it looked like a family at dinner, because it was a family at dinner. And it also looked like a woman in the middle of the longest, quietest, most private decision of her life. Both of those things were true. That was the hardest part. It was a Tuesday in November when everything became clear, and the way it became clear was so ordinary that she almost missed it. It was 5 in the afternoon. The light outside was already gone, the sky that particular flat gray of a winter evening that offers no warmth and no drama, just the plain fact of darkness arriving on schedule. Oliver was at a friend's house until 6. George was asleep on the kitchen floor. Mara was in the laundry room, folding a basket of clothes that had been sitting since the morning. That specific domestic task that requires enough attention to occupy the hands and almost none to occupy the mind. The window in the laundry room was old. The frame had warped slightly over the years, so that it never quite closed flush. In summer this was pleasant. In winter she meant to do something about it and never did. There was a gap, perhaps 2 inches, at the bottom left corner, where the frame pulled away from the wall, and through this gap on a still evening you could hear, with surprising clarity, what was happening on the terrace at the back of the house. Dante was on the terrace. She heard his voice before she registered what was happening. A reflex, the way you recognize a familiar sound before you consciously identify it. His voice had a particular quality outdoors, less contained than it was indoors, spread slightly by the air. He was on the phone. She kept folding. She was not thinking about listening. She was thinking about the laundry. But the window was open 2 inches, and her husband's voice was very clear, and she was, by now, a woman whose attention had been sharpened to a specific point. She heard him say, "The situation in the north is being resolved." She shook out a shirt, folded it along the seams, set it on the pile. "I understand the concerns," Dante said. "I have the same concerns, which is why I handled it personally." She picked up a pair of Oliver's trousers, folded them small, set them down. "There will be no further complications," Dante said. "You have my word." She was very still now, though her hands had not stopped moving. She was folding by memory, by the muscle knowledge of 1,000 previous folds, while the rest of her focused on the voice coming through the 2-inch gap in the window. "The man is no longer a problem," Dante said. 5 words. She picked up a shirt of Dante's, one of the gray ones, folded the arms across the front. "What I did was necessary," he said. "You knew that when you asked me to." Her hands kept moving. The shirt was folded. She set it on the pile. She was aware of her own breathing. In, slowly. Out, slowly. The way she breathed when she was trying not to wake someone. The way she breathed when she needed her body to stay quiet while her mind did something important. "Then we are agreed," Dante said. "It is done." A pause. She imagined the other person speaking. She could not hear them. She heard only the pause, which was short. "Good night," Dante said. He said it pleasantly. The same voice he used to say good night to his mother. Warm and final, and entirely at ease. The line was closed. She heard the soft sound of a phone being set on the iron table outside. She heard the slight shift of his weight in the chair. She looked down at the laundry basket. It was empty. She had folded all of it without knowing. Every item, perfectly folded, in a pile she had made without watching herself make it. She picked up the pile. She carried it to the bedroom. She put each item in its correct place. The drawers and the shelves and the particular fold of Oliver's trousers on the bottom shelf where he would find them in the morning. Then she went back to the kitchen. She filled a pot with water. She set it on the stove. She turned on the flame. She stood at the stove, and she waited for the water to boil. Outside she could hear Dante still on the terrace. She heard the soft scrape of the chair as he stood. She heard the terrace door open. She heard his footsteps cross the kitchen floor behind her. He paused near the counter. "Starting dinner?" he said. "Yes," she said. "What are we having?" She named the dish. Something she made often. A pasta dish he had always liked. Simple and filling. The kind of thing that takes half an hour and tastes like more effort than it is. "Good," he said. He got himself a glass of water. He stood beside her for a moment. She felt the warmth of him close by, the familiar weight of his presence. "Oliver back by 6?" he said. "Yes." "I'll go get him," he said. "You stay with the cooking." "Okay," she said. He set down his glass. He got his jacket from the hook. She heard the front door close. She stood at the stove. The water was beginning to stir at the bottom of the pot, little bubbles forming and rising, not boiling yet, just the first signs of it. She was not crying. She wanted to be precise about that, in her own mind, because she felt that it mattered. She was not crying, and she was not shaking, and she was not afraid in any way that had a name she recognized. What she felt was closer to the thing you feel when you have been carrying a heavy bag for a very long time, and you set it down and there is a moment, before the relief, before anything, where you simply stand and register the absence of the weight. She had been carrying something for 13 years. She was only now understanding how heavy it was. Because she had heard it now, not the suggestion of it, not the shape of it in the shadows. She had heard it plainly, through a gap in a window frame that had never been fixed, on a November evening while she was folding laundry. There are things a man does not say unless they are true. The man is no longer a problem, is one of them. What I did was necessary is another. She did not tell herself she had misunderstood. She had been misunderstanding things for 13 years, by choice, and that time was over. She knew what she had heard. The water boiled. She added salt. She added the pasta. She set the timer. She moved around the kitchen with the ease of a woman who knew exactly where everything was, because she had put it there, because she had built this kitchen into something that worked, and it still worked, and she still knew where everything was, and this was all still true. And yet, she thought about what she was going to do. Not in the panicked way, not the way of a person standing at the edge of something and feeling the ground move. She thought about it the way she folded laundry, methodically, piece by piece, each thing given its proper place. She thought about Oliver. She thought about Claire's question, "What story do you want to be in?" She thought about her own answer, a true one. She stirred the pasta. The thing she had been avoiding for weeks, the thing she had circled and approached and retreated from, was not a question at all, she realized. It had only felt like a question, because she had not been ready for the answer. She was ready now. She had stood in this kitchen for 13 years and made food and made conversation and made a life, and she had done all of it with great love and great care, and she did not regret a single meal or a single conversation, or the blue paint in the study, or the dahlias on the windowsill. She did not regret Oliver. She did not regret the version of Dante she had loved, and still loved, in the way you love a place you know you are leaving, fully, and with the particular sharpness of something that is ending. But she had heard what she had heard, and what she had heard was the truest thing she had ever been given in this marriage, even though it was not meant for her. The timer went off. She drained the pasta. She made the sauce. She set the table for 3. She was going to leave this house. She did not know when. She did not know exactly how. She did not know what the steps were, in their right order, or how long they would take, or what it would look like from the outside. But she knew, with the calm certainty of a woman who had just folded an entire basket of laundry without registering it, that she was going to build a door out of this life. Quietly, carefully, piece by piece. She was going to open it. She was going to walk through it. She was going to take her son. The front door opened. She heard Oliver's voice first, high and rushing, telling Dante about something that had happened at his friend's house, and Dante's voice underneath it, low and patient and warm. She heard the sound of coats being hung, and shoes being kicked off, and the dog waking up with a groan from the kitchen floor. Her family came into the kitchen. She smiled. She served dinner. She listened to her son talk about birds. And somewhere beneath the surface of all of it, a decision that had been forming for weeks, finished forming, quietly and completely, like a lock that has found the right key. She was going to leave. She was just going to do it at the right time, in the right way, with every step planned, and every piece in its correct place. She was her mother's daughter, after all, and her mother had taught her, the most important things in life are not done quickly. They are done correctly. She filled Oliver's glass. She asked him about the heron. He lit up like a lamp. She listened. The first thing she did was call her sister. Not to explain, not to confess. She called her sister, whose name was Patricia, and who lived in a city 3 hours away, and who had a spare room that had been a spare room for years, because Patricia had always said, half joking, that she was keeping it for emergencies. Mara asked her, in the middle of a conversation about something else entirely, whether the room was still available. Patricia said, "Of course it is. Why?" Mara said, "I might need it." A pause. "How long?" Patricia said. "I don't know yet." Another pause, shorter. "It's yours," Patricia said, "whenever you need it." That was all. Patricia did not push. She was 2 years older than Mara, and they had grown up in the same small house, and they had the kind of understanding between them that does not require explanation, the way the bones of a building understand each other through the walls without any visible connection. Mara said, "Thank you." She hung up. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that had gone cold while she sat there, and George was nearby doing what George did best, and outside the November morning was flat and white, and the garden was finished for the year, the last of anything green gone now. She picked up the cold tea. She drank it. She began. She did not move quickly. Quick was not the right thing here. She thought about this carefully, the pace of what she was doing, the rhythm of it. She had watched Dante operate in the world for 13 years, and the primary lesson she had absorbed, without meaning to, was that the most powerful movements are the ones that look like stillness. She moved like stillness. She called no one else for 2 weeks. She made no changes to anything visible. She cooked dinner every night. The usual things. The things that smelled right, and tasted like the house they had always been. She helped Oliver with his homework. She attended the school's parent evening and sat beside Dante in a row of plastic chairs, while Oliver's teacher said good and thoughtful things about their son, and Dante nodded with his particular attentive nod, and Mara smiled and asked a question, and everything was exactly as it appeared. At home, in the hours when Dante was out and Oliver was at school, she began to untangle 13 years of a shared life from the inside. She was careful with this. She had done some reading, careful reading, on her phone, in private browsing, the kind that leaves no trace, about the practical shape of what she was doing. She understood that the first rule was to make no visible change. The second rule was to understand the full picture of what was shared between them before removing herself from it. The third rule, the one she had arrived at herself, was this: leave nothing behind that you will need. She went through the house with a mind like a fine comb. She was not looking for evidence. That was not her job, and she had no interest in it. She was looking for herself, the pieces of her life that were genuinely hers, that had existed before this house and would continue after it. The photographs, not the ones on the walls, those were part of the house, but the ones in boxes, the ones from before, letters, the film camera from the market, her grandmother's ring, which she never wore but kept in the back of the jewelry box because she had always meant to resize it. She found things she had forgotten she owned, a journal from the first year of their marriage, which she read one afternoon sitting on the bedroom floor, and then set aside with the particular emotion of looking at a photograph of yourself very young. She looked young in those pages. She had been 29, and in love, and she had written in the earnest, reaching way of a person who believes the vocabulary for what she is feeling will arrive soon. She had been right, it turned out. The vocabulary had arrived. It had just taken 13 years. She met with a lawyer named Francis, who practiced out of an office in the next town, the kind of office that had no nameplate on the outside, and was reached by an appointment that could be made by phone without leaving a name. Francis was a small, dry-humored woman in her 60s, who had spent her career specializing in precisely the kind of situation Mara did not name directly, but described in enough detail that naming was unnecessary. Francis listened. When Mara finished, Francis said, "You are not the first person to sit in that chair." "I know," Mara said. "The first thing I need to understand," Francis said, "is what you want from the outcome. Not what you think you can get. What you want." Mara thought about this. "I want Oliver," she said. "I want to be somewhere safe, and I want to leave without creating a situation that puts any of us at risk." Francis nodded. "That third thing," she said, "is the one that requires patience." "I have patience," Mara said. Francis looked at her for a moment. "Yes," she said, "I believe you do." They met 3 more times over the following weeks. Francis explained things carefully and plainly, which Mara appreciated. She had always responded to clarity. She liked knowing exactly what she was dealing with. The shape of a thing, fully seen, is never as frightening as the shape of a thing half seen in the dark. Some of what Francis told her was alarming. Some of it was less so than she had feared. All of it was useful. She moved money slowly. Not large amounts. Nothing that would register as a pattern. She had always had access to the household accounts. Dante had been generous in this, entirely without friction, because he was not a man who needed to control the small things. And she moved things carefully, incrementally, into an account that Francis had helped her establish in her own name alone. She did this with the same methodical attention she brought to the laundry, each piece given its right place, each step taken in the right order. She did not feel guilty about this. She had examined whether she should, and concluded that guilt required a different set of circumstances than the ones she was living in. December arrived. The house got its usual Christmas decorations because Oliver loved them, and Mara loved anything that Oliver loved. She and Oliver spent a Saturday afternoon putting up lights, Oliver on a step stool threading them through the branches of the tree with the focused seriousness he brought to the bird guide, and Dante watching from the doorway with a glass of something warm, and that particular expression he wore when he was allowing himself to be contented. She watched him watching their son. She held both things again, the man who had arranged the disappearance of a problem, and the man who stood in a doorway watching his child decorate a Christmas tree, with the quiet look of a person who knows he is, in this moment, exactly where he wants to be. She held both things. She did not let either one cancel out the other. She was done doing that. Oliver climbed down from the step stool and stood back and surveyed his work. The tree was covered in lights that were slightly chaotic in their distribution, clustered in some places and sparse in others, in the way of an 8-year-old who is operating by instinct rather than system. "What do you think?" Oliver said. "I think it's perfect," Mara said. She meant it. She put her arm around her son's shoulders and looked at the tree. She was going to leave this house. She was going to take this boy. She was going to take the photographs and the film camera and the notebook with its one unfinished question and the grandmother's ring that had never been resized. She was going to leave in the right way, at the right moment, without panic and without noise. She was going to do it because she had heard a man say, "The man is no longer a problem," through a 2-inch gap in a window. And she had stood there and kept folding laundry, and she had understood that the line she had always known existed had, at some point, been crossed without her consent. She was going to do it because of Oliver. She was going to do it because of the woman in the journal from the first year of marriage, the 29-year-old woman writing in the earnest way of someone waiting for the right vocabulary. The vocabulary was here now. And what it said was, "It is time." On the morning of a Thursday in the second week of January, Mara drove Oliver to school the way she did every Thursday. She made sure he had his bird guide, which he had left on the hall table as usual. She reminded him about his homework, which he had completed the night before and already packed. She pulled up at the school gate, and he gathered his bag and opened the door, and turned back to say goodbye the way he always did. A quick, direct look that was entirely his own, a look that carried nothing performative in it, just the plain fact of his attention on her face. She said, "I love you." He said, "Love you too, Mum," and was gone, running toward his friends with the particular energy of a child who has fully moved on to the next thing. She sat in the parked car for a moment. Then she drove back to the house. She had 3 hours. Dante had a meeting that he would come home from no earlier than 1. She had verified this without asking directly. A skill she had developed over the past months with the quiet usefulness of a tool you did not know you needed until you needed it. She knew his schedule in a way she had always known it, because she had always organized their household around it, and now she was simply using that knowledge for a different purpose. She went upstairs first. She had 2 bags, not suitcases. Suitcases announced themselves. 2 bags, the kind she used for trips, unremarkable and familiar. She had kept them in the back of the wardrobe for weeks, partially packed, in the way you pack for a journey you are not yet ready to take. She finished packing. It did not take long. She had been precise about what she was taking. Clothing, enough for both of them for several weeks. The photographs in their folders, the film camera, the grandmother's ring, Oliver's field guide, which was the 3rd copy she had bought. She had placed a new copy in his bag months ago, and kept the original here, the one that was actually his, the one with his handwriting in the margins. She went through the house one more time. She was not looking for things she had missed. She was looking at the house. The blue in the study, the lamp in the corner of the living room, the vase on the windowsill where the dahlias had been. She was giving it her full attention, which she felt it deserved, because she had made this house, and it had been, for a long time, a genuine home. She stood in the kitchen. George was in his bed, snoring. She knelt down beside him. She put her hand on his side. He opened one eye at her. "Okay," she said. She had arranged for George. She had called her neighbor, a woman named Dora who had always loved George unreservedly, and who had agreed, with no further questions because Dora was a woman who understood when no further questions were needed, to take him for an extended stay beginning that morning. Dora had already come and collected him the night before while Dante was in the study, and Oliver was in bed. She had told Dante that George was going to stay with Dora for a few days because Dora had mentioned she was lonely, and Dante had said good in the way he said it, and that was that. George was already safe. She stood up. She picked up the bags. She walked to the front door. She paused there. There was no drama in this moment. She had expected, at various points over the past weeks, to feel something enormous here, grief, or fear, or relief so large it resembled loss. Instead, what she felt was the same thing she had felt standing at the stove while the water boiled. A small, settled, very quiet certainty. She opened the door. She put the bags in the car. She drove to Oliver's school, where she had already spoken with the school's administrative office, and arranged, with the necessary paperwork, to collect him at midday on a family matter. She collected her son. He was surprised. He looked at her with that direct look of his and said, "Is everything okay?" She said, "Yes, we're going on a trip." His face shifted into interest. "Where?" "To Auntie Patricia's." He considered this. Patricia had a large house with a garden that backed onto a small woodland, which Oliver associated correctly with excellent birdwatching opportunities. "Okay," he said. He got in the car. They drove. She did not tell him everything that day. He was 8 years old, and there would be time, in the right way, for as much truth as he could carry, at whatever age he could carry it. What she told him, carefully and plainly, as they drove away from the town they had lived in all his life, was that things were going to be different for a while, and that she was going to take care of him, and that Auntie Patricia was very happy they were coming. He asked, after a while, "What about Dad?" She had thought about this answer for a long time. She said, "Your dad loves you very much. That is not going to change." Oliver was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Is George going to be okay?" She smiled. Because he was her son. She said, "George is going to be perfectly fine." He nodded. He looked out the window. After a while, he started watching for birds. Patricia met them at the door. She held Mara for a long moment without saying anything. She showed Oliver the room that would be his, which looked out over the garden and the woodland beyond, and Oliver stood at the window and was immediately absorbed in something he could see out there. Later, when Oliver was asleep, Mara and Patricia sat in the kitchen. Patricia made tea. She set it down, and she sat across from her sister, and she did not ask questions. She just sat with her. "I did the right thing," Mara said. It was not a question. "Yes," Patricia said. They sat in the quiet for a while. Mara drank her tea. It was warm, and it was strong, and it was exactly what she had needed. She thought about the house she had left. She thought about the blue paint in the study, and the lamp in the corner, and the dahlias that came and went by season. She thought about Dante sitting in his reading chair in the lamplight. That single word, yes, on his lips. The stillness of him so practiced, it had become a kind of architecture. She thought about the last 13 years. She did not hate them. She did not regret them in the simple way that regret usually works. She was just done with them. She finished her tea. She said goodnight to her sister. She went to the room Patricia had given her, the room that was clean and plain and had no particular history, and she sat on the bed, and she opened the brown notebook to the page where she had written, in her smallest handwriting, "What do you do when the man you love is exactly who he always was?" She looked at it for a long time. Then she turned to a new page. She wrote, "You leave." She closed the notebook. She turned out the light. She lay in the dark and she listened to the particular quiet of a new place. Not the absence of sound, but different sounds, unfamiliar, and therefore present in a way that familiar sounds never are. A tree somewhere nearby, distant traffic, lower and different from what she knew. She breathed in. She breathed out. She was going to be fine. She was going to make something from scratch, the way she had made the house she had just left, but this time knowing from the beginning that it was hers, fully hers. Every color chosen because she chose it, every smell in the walls the smell she had put there. She closed her eyes. In the room down the hall, Oliver was sleeping deeply and peacefully, probably dreaming of herons. She was going to take good care of that boy. She was going to take good care of herself. Those two things, she had decided, were not in conflict. They never had been. She had just needed 13 years and a 2-inch gap in a window frame to understand that. She slept. 3 days after Mara left, Dante came home to a house that was not missing anything obvious. That was the first thing. He walked through the door at his usual time, set his jacket on the usual hook, and stood in the hallway for a moment, in the way he sometimes stood in a room, very still, taking in the quality of the air. Something was different. He could not have said what. He walked through to the kitchen. The surfaces were clean. There was food in the refrigerator. The coffee maker was on the counter where it always was. He stood in the middle of the kitchen and turned slowly, looking at each thing in its place. George's bed was in the corner, empty. He had been told about George. He had said good, in the way he said good. He went upstairs. He opened Oliver's wardrobe. Clothes there. He was not sure exactly what Oliver had never inventoried it, but the wardrobe was not empty. He went to the master bedroom. He opened the wardrobe there. He stood looking at it for a long time. He was very good at reading the shape of an absence. It was a skill that his life had required, and that he had developed to a high degree. He could walk into a room and feel the exact weight of what was not there. He felt it now. He sat on the edge of the bed. He sat there for several minutes. He did not pick up a phone. He did not call anyone. He simply sat on the edge of the bed in the room that was still, technically, everything it had always been, and he let the full understanding of what had happened arrive at its own pace. She was gone. She had gone quietly and correctly and without creating a scene, and she had taken the boy, and she had done it on a Thursday morning while he was in a meeting, and she had been planning it for long enough that there was no panic in the execution, no rushed packing, no forgotten things in obvious places. No note on the kitchen counter. He sat on the edge of the bed. He thought about the Thursday mornings Leonard came to the house. He thought about the coffee she had brought Leonard without being asked. He thought about the conversation over dinner. "You seem far away lately." "I'm right here." He had believed her. He had believed her because he had looked at her face and read it the way he always did, with the full attention he gave to things that mattered. And what he had read was a woman who was exactly where she said she was. She had been lying. He sat with that. It was not a comfortable thing to sit with, not because of the lying itself. He was not a man who could reasonably hold lying against anyone, but because of what it meant. It meant she had learned, somewhere in the last few months, to show him one face while carrying another one entirely. She had learned that from watching him. He understood this. He sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, and the house was quiet around him. The particular quiet of a house that has been well kept and is now simply empty. And in all that quiet there was not one single sound of anything that needed him. He stood up eventually. He went downstairs. He made himself a coffee, 2 sugars, a small pour of cream, because that was how coffee was made in this kitchen, and the habits of 13 years do not dissolve in 3 days. He sat at the kitchen table. He did not look at the empty dog bed. He thought about what to do. There was a version of this, he knew it precisely, where he made calls, where he used the weight of the world he lived in to locate a woman and a child and bring them back to a house that would then be, in every meaningful sense, a different kind of place than it had been before. He knew men who had done this. He had seen how it ended. He had no interest in that version. He was, whatever else he was, a man who understood mathematics. The mathematics here were plain. She had left. She had left in a way that demonstrated careful thought over an extended period. She had left and taken Oliver, which was correct, because Oliver belonged with his mother. He had, in some remote recess of himself that he rarely consulted, always known that Oliver belonged with his mother. He thought about Oliver. He thought about the drawing that was still on the refrigerator door, held up by a magnet. He turned to look at it from where he sat. The blue jacket, the stick figure family, the hands open, palms upward. He looked at that drawing for a while. Then he looked at the kitchen around him, the clean surfaces. The dahlias were gone. She had taken the vase. The windowsill where it had always stood was simply a windowsill now. He drank his coffee. He sat in the kitchen of the house that had been his home, and that was now simply a house, and he was alone in it. And he thought about the particular weight of that, and he found that it was not entirely different from other weights he had carried. He was good at carrying things. He put his cup in the sink. He went to his study and he sat at his desk and he worked, because the work was there and it did not wait. And the world that Dante Orsini had built for himself over 25 years continued to exist with complete indifference to what had happened in his kitchen. That was the thing about a life like his. It did not stop for personal matters. There were calls to return and meetings to arrange, and men who depended on him being exactly who he was at every moment. And so he was exactly who he was, in the study of his quiet house, with the same unhurried precision that he brought to everything. The phone rang. He picked it up before the second ring. He did not lean forward. He said, "Yes." The same word, the same voice, the same stillness that had never been peace and had never pretended to be. He listened. He spoke. He handled it. When the call was done, he set the phone down and he looked at the desk in front of him. He thought about Mara, just for a moment, not with anger, not with the particular coldness that was his version of anger, with something he did not have an easy name for, a thing between recognition and respect, and the clean, sharp edge of something he might, in a different life, have called loss. She had watched him carefully enough to learn how to leave like him. She had taken the boy, and she had gone to somewhere safe, and she had done it without creating a problem, without leaving loose ends, without raising her voice. She had handled it quietly. He almost said it aloud. He didn't. He went back to work. The house held its silence around him, the silence of a well-made thing that does not require anyone in it to remain exactly what it is. He worked until late. He made dinner for one. He ate it at the head of the table, in his usual chair. He ate without hurry. Outside, the January night was deep and cold, and the garden was long past anything growing, and the house was warm because the heating worked correctly, and had always worked correctly, and would continue to do so regardless of who was or was not sitting in it. Life went on. He knew this better than most people. He had built his entire existence on the understanding that life goes on regardless of what you feel about it, that the world does not pause to accommodate grief or loss or the particular emptiness of a chair at a table. He finished his dinner. He washed the plate. He set it in the cabinet with the handle of the cup turned the right way, the way she had always done it, the way it had simply become the way things were done in this kitchen. He turned off the kitchen light. He went upstairs. He passed Oliver's room. The door was open. The room was empty and neat. He stood in the doorway for a moment. He looked at the window, which looked out over the garden. He thought about Oliver standing at that window with his field guide, naming the things he could see, the patience of the child's attention, the way he tilted his head, just like his grandfather, at things that interested him. He was going to see Oliver again. That was not in question. He would call Patricia's number in a few days, when enough time had passed, and he would speak to his son, and he would do whatever was required in the correct order, through the correct channels, and Oliver would know that his father was available to him. That was all he could offer. He understood, standing in the doorway of his son's empty room in the quiet of the house his wife had built and then left, that it was perhaps not enough. He understood it the way he understood most true things, clearly, without drama, and too late to do anything about it. He turned away from the room. He went to his own room. He sat on the edge of the bed. Outside, somewhere in the dark garden, there was a sound. He could not identify it at first. Then he placed it. A bird, something small, calling in the cold, the kind of thing Oliver would have known the name of immediately. He listened to it for a moment. Then it was gone. He lay down. He closed his eyes. Across the city, in a direction he did not know, in a house he had never been inside, Mara was sleeping in a room with no particular history. Across the same dark, Oliver was sleeping the deep, untroubled sleep of a child who has been told that he is loved and that his dog is fine. George was asleep on Dora's sofa, fully content, as he had always been. The house was still. Life went on. It always had. It always would. And somewhere in all of that, in the enormous quiet ordinariness of the world continuing to exist without asking anyone's permission, three people were beginning, in their own ways and at their own pace, the particular work of whatever came next. There is no ending to a story like this. There is only the next morning, and the morning after that, and the patience to find out, one day at a time, what you are made of when everything you were certain of is simply gone. Mara already knew what she was made of. She had known since the night she stood in a kitchen doorway and did not drop the plate. The rest was just time.